is not started.
Okay, good point there. My comment there was, and maybe I'm asking agree, disagree there. A case of like it works, but it's way more complicated than it needs to be. So what's going to happen if you keep doing that is you're going to burn yourself out unnecessarily. So like if you see the more easy solution to this, you'll be like, oh, of course, you spend probably 3 times more time than you needed to. And the same happens if you're going to a job interview. They give you that question, you'll get stuck on it. Instead, the correct solution, it also works. That's the most important thing, right? It works, so you got it right. But how do we make it so it's less complicated? So where was that? Okay, here's the comment, right? Anybody maybe want to jump in on what's wrong here or potentially feedback?
Just open it in a new file.
Yeah, good idea. I was just going to say, like, there's a couple of things in there that are, like, really obvious. We can start with that, because then it's not... but there's a few things that are not so obvious, and then we can go from there.
There we go.
Anybody see one really, really obvious thing that doesn't need to be there at all?
Using function.
No.
Get data, return data.
Yes, then data, return data. You're doing nothing here. It essentially you delete the whole thing, it will still work, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is you're basically you're wrapping a promise, but you're not. I don't think there's anything in the exercise that you should create your own promise. Now, it could solve it like this, but if I tell you, don't use promises here, how would you? You're allowed to call, you're allowed to fetch, you're allowed to use then, but don't create a new promise. How would you do it there?
No, that's about prompt.
Actually, why I create a new promise, what I thought was, the one of the exercise was and I to output as
Yes, correct.
yes. What I thought was, if I have to do that, I have to use a set account.
That's right.
If I have to call the response inside, I also have to create a new promise.
I saw that. Yeah, of course. That's what you thought. Am I right? Or is there a way?
Solve it with a promise here.
Mhm.
Because you log it out in a then at the end, then you have to do what you did. You have to make a new promise because you make your own implementation of when the promise is resolved.
This is
Do it here, right? You resolve, like you said, you use the timeout and you resolve your own promise, and then you can come up. If you put the console log here instead, then you wouldn't have needed to make it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could fold it in. This is working too, yeah.
I'm not sure if you need it.
What I think is just that if you didn't do the new promise, then I think there would be like 3 lines here and not 10.
I can try to rewrite this and just
So that's the difference. Yeah, let's do that.
just get rid of the sidebar. So this is what it looks like, right? This is what it looked like, right? So if you change it, let's just call this original. So we have it in the comments on the video. So if you wanted to say just call it new, just to have a different name. So instead, what Alex said, you could just return the promise directly. Fetch is a promise, right?
Oh, fetch data new business then. There should be a police on line number 36.
All right.
Yes.
Oh, function. So you could just call it and it will return fetch. You could remove this one, which is redundant. And then you could put the console about that, but you wouldn't be able to use then at the end here if you chose this way. Then you would need to resolve it like this instead.
So you wouldn't actually. I would even like. remove the function completely and just do it
Yeah.
like inline all of it.
Yeah, you can also do
Exactly that. So then look how much simpler it gets.
But it's not the same solution.
No, well, but now, yeah, you have two thens, and only that, and there's no function call and there's no resolve.
Since we're looking at this anyway, when you have a function that return immediately, you can use, when you use arrow function,
You don't have to, because it's a tag, right? You don't have to use it.
you can use the implicit return.
I don't know why I did it.
No, it's fine. You can do it. It's a preference. Yeah, it's okay. So you could write like this, even smaller.
Yeah, well, yeah.
See how much harder it is?
Okay. Other questions? No?
And I also had discovered one more exercise, I think.
I didn't see all your stuff.
I had one about callback hell.
Yeah.
You want to see that one?
We do. There's a good opportunity to show. I think already. Reading in class.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Yes.
We have it's like today we done with something, and also the problem in the other old home. It's, I want to when I have somebody take the photos, do something.
Yeah.
If I want when I make a game, I delete what I did before and
How you delete elements in the DOM?
today we have this about with the program another image. So when you pick another time, so it will be from another image. The old image.
Yeah, I understand. Clearing DOM elements. Let's make a sample. Elements. So you have this, you use this create element syntax, right? That's the way, so you have this, just call it P. Let's just make a paragraph. So it's called document? I don't remember. Can someone help me with this? Create element? Yeah, we can do it in images. And then you would have document. Okay. So the reason is how you, because when you use append child, right? Yeah. So you have some element here, right? And you use root append child, right? So when you append child, you just keep adding it, like you said, right? That's why it added underneath each other. So how do you delete those? Anyone know?
Yeah. We can remove the first child. We can remove the child. Root.remove child.
Is there multiple children?
Well, it doesn't work with hands.
When I put it in the same function before
Yeah.
add the remove, add the remove, when I click the photo, it will go from up, so read from up to down. So remove item, it will resolve.
It changes the order or something?
I think we need to make the full example.
Okay, maybe, yeah, I think it's worth to do the exact.
Is it called text content?
I am not really sure, but I have that kind of problem with your exercises. And I discussed it with someone, hopefully now, but there was a simple, small, we have to push browser to clean cache or clean cache or
Well, if you refresh the page, then all the stuff you appended will disappear. But that's not really that's not really the real solution to this. I'm just
I
trying.
think we have done like this in homework, right? I think the shopping cart homework or something, it's right way, we have done that. We have
I don't, this is, I don't know.
Okay, let's just do a function add p. Sorry if we're going to take a bit of time for this, but I think it's useful. Okay. Can see this? It says test. Still work? Did I break it?
we can first.
Can't see anything.
Body has the image tag, and if there is already an image tag, we can remove the image tag.
Yeah, it's a bit complicated, but yeah, you can do that. Let's see how this looks. So you call this once, it adds a p tag. You can see it. Zoom. Adds a p tag. Call the function again. It will add 2 p tags. So this is the problem, right? This is similar to what you click a button every time. So you want to remove this every time. So how do you do that? Does anyone have an answer? Or should I just...
Can you replace the first one?
Replacing is not... You can replace, but replacing in code is actually removing and then adding a new one. That's not a replace concept.
I think you can make it empty, but
There's several ways you can... The way you would probably do it if you use these create elements, you can use that. Remember the inner HTML? You can use that. That's kind of a cheating. So let's not do that. A different way you can remove child, right? So this is what you proposed. But how do we get the argument? We don't know what the child is. So a way to do this, you can render all the children. There's a helper called children, which will return an array of all the children. So if you take that for each, we loop it, and then you call this remove child on each one. So if there are 20, it will call it on all of them, right? Or if there's 1, it will just call them. I assume this will work. I haven't written code like this in ages. See? Didn't work. Children is not a function. Great. Okay, let's just Google it then. DOM get children. Oh, it's just called, it's not a function. It's just,
JavaScript. That's an interesting search.
it's just called children. It's not a function. Try it again. See if it works first then. No. This is great, eh? Great example. Let's just see what root is. You can see a little bit of how I debug stuff if I have a problem, so you will see the same thing. Let's get the root. The root is empty, right?
Maybe because there's nothing like you need to add.
Get element by ID, get children. How to search for children of an HTML element. Child nodes. This is the one we need. Try it again. Is it just, if you're in doubt what these things are called, no one remembers this. So that's why you Google, like, say, DOM element, find all children, and you will find Stack Overflow page, something that will give you some help, right? Because you're not supposed to memorize all of this. Right? Okay, but it's just learning how to search and the keywords to use and all this stuff. But you see now it has one test, right? If I remove this, it will write 2 of them, right? So this one will take, this is the solution to that problem you have. It will have the root, which is the wrapper that has children, child nodes, which is an array of all the children. Do that for each one, you say root, remove, remove whatever is there.
So after line 30, the body will be empty, right?
Yeah, then it will be empty, and then we see we append the next one. So it will have a fresh one at the bottom of the time. And if you, go.
There's another solution where instead of removing the children, you just say child nodes equals new array. And that's also the same thing. Same, that way you have one line instead of 3.
Or if you're lazy and you're cheating, which you you can just do inner HTML and it will destroy it.
That's not fair.
But it's not the,
Definitely not fair.
depends on who you are.
Because we have in one of the homeworks, we had the solution given to us, and that was implemented like this. It's stupid.
I mean, nothing's going to happen, you know, it's not going to blow up the world, but...
If you're learning, it's better to use the form. If you are in the real estate, all this is very elegantly, it will never happen. Once you get to React, all of these problems will go away. Well, there will be other problems. The fetch, you asked about fetch before. Can we cover it in the break? Does anyone else have?
I'm not done.
All right.
The last one, the promise, I think I did it wrong. Like,
Oh, the callback hell thing. Yeah. Let's look at
Oh,
that.
that's a very good, that's a good one to get back feedback on.
Yeah. So when you use callback, so see, this is not callback. So a little bit bigger, maybe. Gold. Looks like this, right? This is translated one by one. The last part of the exercise. And you can see how the code shifts in every time.
yes.
This is when you see this pattern where the code shifts in for each iteration. This is what we call callback hell. This is callback hell. It sounds more dramatic. You push the code in every time. And this is, you only use promises. You see you have these thens. This is a promise. So the promises, we don't have to do this. We don't have to push the code in every time. If you use callback functions, which is the obvious other way you like to do it, you would have this structure. About 7-8 years ago, we all wrote code like this, and we found out people who were developers at the time hated this because this is very complicated. And if you have to change something here, like you take this out and all the other stuff it's very interconnected.
In the worst case scenario, you have things that are declared in line 4 that are then used inside line 12, and then you will never find out what happened. You really have to be careful with that.
Not use promises,
Oh, yeah, not then, yes.
but you can prevent this pattern here. So I will show you. This is the way I wrote the comment for it. So this is the rewritten with correct use of promises. You see the difference is that I return it every time. Okay, in the first then I return the promise. This is a promise, right? This returns a promise. I return that, and it gets picked up by the next one. So I don't have to, when you don't return it, you get this callback else situation where it's indented every time. But when you return it every time, you can just catch in the next one. You have a flat structure. If I want to get rid of this, I can just take this piece of code and remove it, and the rest will be fine. If I had the other structure with callback out, if I took this out, all the other things would break. And I'll have to rewrite it. This is just a more manageable way. This is called chaining. When you use promises, you can chain them by returning them to the next step. You have this nice readable flat structure.
This will see a lot.
Yeah.
But even better, I'm not supposed to say it, but there's this another
Oh,
way
it's
to
just
write code, and next one we did not talk about it.
Async await had one question on Slack about that as well. Probably some people saw it if you Googled promises.
I have to know about that.
Async await is the modern equivalent to promise. So you put this async around the function, and it tells it that this is an asynchronous function. That means you can do these. You can use await, and you can say, so you want to have this console, well, okay, this doesn't return a function. So if you await, the same thing as using then, if you await, you can just do it in a single line. So I can just say await, and then below that, I think it's a bad idea to teach this, but let's do it.
It is not a bad idea, it is a good idea.
Yeah. So instead of having the then, you can use await, which works the same way, but you don't have to write then. You can just write it in a single line. This keyword means wait for this to happen, and then move on to the next one. It's exactly the same code as writing then, it's a lot more. Because we have complex
So in this
functions.
case, then how do I do chaining?
If you don't have to do chaining when you use await, because you can just, let me get the next one. So I just take the next one here and I just await that, and then I console log, and then I just await the last one, right? Let's just get to it right. The console log. So this is the same as this.
So now it looks like your code always did. It's my
Same
code.
as.
We don't have to know the promises, but we can just.
Yeah, basically.
Automatically wraps all this in the promise. Actually, the same thing. So it's still promises. It's just. For several years, people say we need a better way. We don't want to write this thing.
Anything that await, we just when we implement a promise.
Yes.
When you use a promise.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Implement is, I would say, when you say promise, then you
You use,
So when we try to requesting an await, is there any change? Is there any change when we try to write a promise?
no.
You don't have to write a promise.
No.
But no, that's not true.
No, it's
Same.
It's only for using the promise. It's instead of these then and catch, and you can see catch works like a try catch. I'm not sure you've seen this. This is very common in most programming languages, has this structure. So this is the same. Remember we did dot catch? So this is dot catch. Right? Yeah. So this is a lot more readable than the other way. But this is also more modern way. So this is the last couple of years, 2-3 years on the road.
Yeah. But how to say, they teach you the old way because you might see some code here and there that still kind of does the old way, and not all browsers support it or whatever. Not all versions of Node.js support it, but it's moving in the direction where like 90% of the browsers and 90% of Node.js out there will already support this.
Yeah.
Now,
Try catch old way.
Try catch is just a general.
try catches up for everything. Yeah.
So instead of that,
what will happen if you have a argument for response?
Yeah, I understand what
Right, when we use await,
we just say just a normal variable, just like that.
Yes.
So if you had a response, if you just used fetch, does fetch work with a wait? Yeah, probably
Yeah.
does, right? So let's use fetch, and then you have a URL here, some URL, something, right? So this would return a promise, right? But if I do a wait, it will resolve the promise and return the result. So that would be the way to save a variable.
And then I can use the response something else.
Then you can it's just a variable, yeah, then you can do whatever here, right?
No, just wait.
Then you can say JSON response, and you can say, is that a promise? I'm not sure, might be.
It is, I think so.
I think it is. This would be the same as having that fetch URL, then response, then salt, then do something. So these would be the same. Let's call this one result.
If you,
This is just easy. It's easy to read and it's easy to pass to write.
no, my question was, when homework and even the classwork we did, and we had a parameter for response.
You return that return value from await is that parameter. You say resolve and then give parentheses 5. You will get 5 here on the response side. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what I say I had problems with. We spent half an hour on the phone with Swati about it. And can you log this console response and console result and type off? What is the nature of the response? Because I was...
This one. We're talking about this one up here.
Talk about result.
Yeah.
Result.
Yeah.
The result is whatever comes back from the API. So it's not a fixed. It's not always the same thing. It depends on the API you call. So if the API gives you an object, it could be an object. If it gives an error, it could be an error, and so on.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Not really, yeah. Actually, where she had doubt was she was trying to access the site outside the function.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't. So she has doubts how to pass the data, how
You-
to access the data.
Okay.
So what's the example? don't get what the example is.
Let's just go.
Her doubt was, that we get the data from the fetch and how to access the data. Listen.
The data exists, okay.
We can just show the data in the console and then see what are the keywords like name, ID and all.
Yeah.
And then what I do is I make a list like what.
Oh, yeah, I think it's inside the same function, but she wanted to access the data outside the function. Yeah.
It's not, you can't.
When you pass it to a function as an argument, to another function as an argument,
That's
yes, right? But she, and that's the number that she had.
You can, if you want this, you can want to access it down here, for instance, the global scope.
Yeah.
You can do it, but just save it in a variable, but it's bad practice. You shouldn't. Like if you have it here, you need to pass it as an argument to a function. Or you need to use async await. Async await also solves this problem. Just, but you can store it. This is bad practice. Variable. So you can just do this, right? But the problem with this, right? You can do this, and you can probably handle it some awkward way if you wanted to. The problem with this is that this is an asynchronous function, so the call stack will go here, will go here, and then it will go here, and then at some point this will resolve. But it will be after this line is called. So this will be undefined. By the time the code reaches this, it will be undefined. And then because of the asynchronous function, you try to save it in a variable here, but the code is already past it. It's not going to be available in this variable by the time you move. So that's why you need callbacks. Asynchronous function is always needed. You can do this, saving them like this, but it's a cost.
In general, right, this is a bad practice with async or not maintaining your state in global variables, because that means somebody has to look outside your function to figure out what it's doing. And then you confuse yourself, you will confuse the next guy who's reading it. It's going to be a mess.
So the way you would do it, like handle, result, and then do a function here that does something with result. And then you would call that here with the variable. That's how you do it. It's the only and best way to do it. Well, not the only way, but definitely the best way. And if you do this, you have this where you have just a variable, you just call another function with that variable, and don't do anything else, you can just put it directly in here. Okay? Let's start today's, I think. I already spent an hour on this.
I think this should be really part of the curriculum, but for some reason we're like not putting it officially in. Should be.
Yeah, this part?
Async await.
Yeah.
I think that should be required.
Today, if you would have hired somewhere and you write new code, you would write it like that.
Yeah.
If you have legacy code that you work on, you might have to do promises, old school promises.
We're smarter than
Okay?
Very catchy. You use it async or without. It will be everywhere. So this
Bycatch will handle.
Ignore it or should we use it?
Always catch the errors. Yeah.
The data that I'm getting from the fetch API, if I have to do something with the data, and that is just only maybe 2 or 3 lines, I can do it in the same function, right? I don't have to pass it as an argument to a different function and do only 3 lines of code in that function, right?
No, not necessarily. It's always nice to have that separation of concerns, but you don't have to do it. So it depends on the use case, and the more experience you get, you will see when you wouldn't have to do it. I would say if you have 1 or 2 lines that are fairly basic, it's fine to do it in the function, maybe. If you do like DOM manipulation, like add elements to the page or something, it's nice to have that in a separate function. But it depends on, you don't have to do it. Anything else? No, sorry.
one comment again. So this async await, it doesn't solve all the problems. There's a very important problem it doesn't solve, and there's no way of doing it with async await. The problem is you are awaiting. That means you're not doing anything while that call is happening. Now, if you want to parallelize For example, I want to make 1,000 calls to some server, and some of them are happening at the same time, then you don't want to have a loop with 1,000 awaits, because then you're wasting time. So that's where you use promise all. So you still, these concepts are still useful. Promise all is we have the same kind of thing happening all like in parallel at the same time, and you're just waiting for all the callbacks to come back. Async await, it just says, wait for me here, wait for me here. It's super simple, and 90% of the time that's enough, because you are, doing like 3 or 4 operations here, it's going to be fine. But if you're doing 1,000 parallel ones, then await is not your good friend. So just keep that in mind, like you didn't learn all these things for nothing. Promise all is still around. So, but most of the time, your code will be simpler if you do it like this. Yeah, sorry.
Ready? Let's start today. Do you need a break or we just keep going? 10 minutes past 1? No one says anything, so we'll just keep going. Okay, so classes. We're talking about classes today. So let's start. Oh, a lot on that. Okay. All right. So let's try to take a little. I'll just start by writing what a class is here. We'll just do a comment. Let's just do a class. Easy. So class has a keyword called class. You create a class by writing, just like you write function, write class. Class comment. So this is a class name comment. A class is useful compared to what you learned so far, functions and data structures, primitives, objects, stuff like that. A class will encapsulate the whole lot. So you'll have both the functions and the data in an encapsulated class. Okay? So let's just start doing. So class has one but it's one function called a constructor. The constructor in a class is always called, let's just start with that. This is just a normal function. And when the functions are inside a class, we call them methods, but they're still functions. It's the same thing, they just have a little bit different name. So a constructor is called when the class is instantiated. Remember you asked last time, what does new promise mean? So that's what new promise means. So let's just do a comment, and we instantiate the class with the new keyword. Just like a function, but just new in front. Instantiating means you take this, just a definition of what a comment looks like, and you create a new comment. So this is actually when actually typing a comment. So you have an instance of the class. Description of the class, what a class is, and then the instance of the class is this particular comment which has something. Does it make sense? Final? So let's try to give this an argument. Give it one argument and say this is my comment. This is what I wrote. This is a blog post. I wrote a comment on it. This is my comment. Very creative. So when you pass them in like this, when you say new comment, which is the class name, you pass in variables here. They are given to the constructor. Always the constructor when you pass them in like this. So we will add that comment here. So what will this console log? Yes. Is that obvious to everyone? See if I made it correctly. All right, classes. There we go. Okay. So let's just do another one. Let's just do a time. The time I wrote the comment. Date. So I have comment and I have my date. Try it again. Still works, right? Standard date and whatever text I have. The good thing about this, so I wrote a comment and then Alex comes in, he writes this comment. This is another comment. So now we will have two instances. See? So classes are a way to describe, typically it's a way to describe a real world object. So a comment has the actual comment, the date it was written, who wrote it, whatever. these kind of things. Maybe the person's email, author, what blog post it belongs to, whatever. Okay. So.
What is the argument to construct, the number of arguments to the constructor and the arguments when initiating the class are the same. Right? If the constructor has 3 or 4 arguments, then when create a class, you should have the same number of arguments. You don't have the same.
It can, yeah. Well, depends. If they're optional, maybe some of the arguments are optional, something like that.
Okay.
But
So it will not throw an error if it's less or.
It will be undefined if you put an extra one. Sorry, if you don't put one, then it will be undefined.
just see if you have, I don't know, top comment might be a thing where this is the best comment someone ever made, and that will have a default value. Right? So just like a function, you can have default values as arguments, so you can, if you don't give it, it will just say this argument big. If you did write it, it would be undefined. It's just basic, just like functions work. Right? There's no difference. The only difference is that functions are inside this class construct. And you have the constructor function, which runs when the class is this.
We just have one construction.
Only one constructor. You have one function that is called when it's instantiated, which is called the constructor. That's the standard JavaScript name. It's not. This has to be called that. Okay.
We created a comment before writing const another comment and then another comment. No matter how they will not overlap.
Yes, that's why you create the instance of the class. So each instance is its own separate thing. You can create hundreds of thousands of these if you want to. But they all have the same. The good thing about classes, that's not going to that. Good thing about classes is you can contain the logic in like a contained piece of code that has the functions and the data and you have everything there and you can pass it around as a full instance of the class.
What's the use of the constructor?
Use of the constructor is, I'll show you that now. For instance, if I want to have the comment and I want to save it inside the class, we're going to do this. I'm going to write this, comment equals comment. Let's just do the other one as well. This date equals date. So let's try to console log this comment out. Let's see what that looks like. You see a console logged here, the comment out. I console out the instance of the class. This is the way it shows it in the data. You can see now it has this, it shows it as an object, it says it has comment, but it shows it as an object structure with these curved parentheses, curved braces. And it has these two variables now inside it. Because I might have moved a little bit too fast. Let's try to remove this, see what it looks like without them. Go over it again. See now, when I console log it out, it's just an empty. It says comment, which is the name of the class, and then empty brackets. There's nothing inside the class.
The constructor is to initialize variables.
Yes, and then I can store them. When I use this instance, this, we'll cover this throughout the day, so we'll have to understand all of it right now. Which means this instance of the class. This always refers to this instance. With this instance, I want to save in a variable called comment, this argument. Save the date. I create two variables inside my class and stores these two arguments. Yeah?
And then later you can use those to
I'll do
provide
that now.
functions. So you can have many functions on your class, and this will always be available. So you see this? No, not global. It's for that class. Yeah.
So for instance, if I want to write out all the comments in my blog post, I will have maybe called write. Let's call it output comment. I make a new function here. Oh, is this right? No. No?
It equals to, and then, yeah.
Why can't I
I
remember
don't
this?
remember how.
Why can't I remember this right?
I
I think it's just this. No, it's just like that. Okay. It's just like this. And then we console log. It's okay. So I want to have, let's just leave that empty right now. So instead of console logging out the whole class like I did before, I just wanted to write the comment that the person wrote. Sorry? I want to output the comment. So I came in, I wrote, this is my comment. Then on my blog page, on the bottom, I want to write all the people's comments. So I want to have a helper function. I don't want to remember this. Yeah, I want to have a helper function. So this instantiated class, which is a save and comment variable, it will now have this method function available to it. So I can call this here as a function. And see, I don't give it an argument. It we didn't do that yet. Okay, let's see how that looks like. So you see it says undefined, but it does console log it. But it's because it's empty here. So because in the constructor I saved the two arguments that came in, let's get rid of this. I saved them with this and a variable name, then that variable name will be available in the other functions inside the class. So I can reuse them.
Yeah, so normally what comes in the constructor is the things that you want object to have from the beginning. That's where it's called the constructor. I start the object this way, and then after that, sometimes you want to save it, sometimes you don't, because usually you can. Sometimes you can just use it in the constructor and then leave it there. But most of the time, you want to save it for another function to use. So that's what you're doing here in the constructor. This dot comment, and then later that, because the other comment without this is gone now. It got saved, but then it disappeared.
Yeah, this might have been written 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I think it makes it quickly so, if I have a formularium, for example,
Yes.
you got user,
Yes.
user, phone, mail. I will use a constructor to manage that information.
Yes.
That's why I want the constructor.
Yes. The constructor is a function you want to implement when you create the class. It can be anything in theory.
Yeah, but
But yes.
actually the constructor is actually the initializations, right? So I can create initializations without actually writing a constructor, right? Because the constructor is doing the same. Like I can let comment equal to the parameter that. Okay.
Yeah, but the way, if you didn't have this, you could create a class without a constructor. But if I call this with these two variables here, it doesn't know what to do. So if I want to handle this in my own way for on purpose, I would write my own constructor which would save the arguments or do something else. It might do whatever. But typically it would be something like this. But yes, you would create, if you created them in object, well, no. If you use classes, then you would do what you proposed. And then you would have, if, let's just try to do it with it. So you have class user, and it works the same, right? You make a constructor with username and email,
Yeah.
and then you store these, right? So why is this useful? Anyone propose? Why is it useful to store them inside a class like this?
Which one?
Just any of them. Like, why is it useful to use a class? You could do this in an object, right? So why is it useful to have a class? Let's say we have this. No one has any guesses. Let's try to instantiate this class. How do we instantiate a class?
New user.
And then we give the arguments, right? Mass, my mail, mass, whatever. That's not my email. Okay, so I have another, let's pretend I have a function here that says, is user valid? This is a function that I create. And it will say, let's make it the old way first. So you use the functions like you used so far. You can pass in a username variable, and you can say a username has to be more than 5 letters, for instance, right? Username, how do we check the length of a variable?
No.
Less than 5. return false, or if not, we return true. It's a very simple validation, right? So everyone understands what happens here, right? Okay, so we could call that. We could then call that is user valid, and then we could say mass, and it would say, would it be true or false? False, right? Then we will say there's some error. Error. So I call it error, right? Okay. So this is fine, but let's pretend we have a big code base. We have a lot of code. We need to check the username in 5 different places. We don't want to pass around a string called mass everywhere. Like, we don't want to pass this little string, but what about, we might have the email, we might have the sign up date, we might have, did they sign up to the newsletter, all sorts of information, right? We don't want to pass these around as one variable each. We want to contain it because it's easier. So if you have a class like this, you could just create this isValid function directly on the class, which would have the same logic as if we implement it here. And instead of passing around these variables that we need to remember everything, like we have the username variable, we have the age, we have the sign up date, we have all these things. All of this is contained within the constructor, within the class, the instance of the class. So you can just call it directly. So instead of doing this, we do this. We can do this. So we will say user, because I already instantiated, is valid. Console log, well, we did it the other way around. Console log, class error. Username is not defined. Oh. Why is it not defined?
This dot is something, right?
Yes. Why? Someone.
Because inside it, everything is like this. This is the reference of the values which is given to that constructor.
Yes, exactly. This is a reference to the instance of the class. So if you just write it like this, that means it has to be available within the scope right here. But if you use this, then it has to be available in the whole class scope. So we use this.
This is a very common mistake. You will just make a typo and forget about this. But it's easy to see also the error in my happening of the class.
If you have a lot of logic compared to user, validation, the sign up, when to design all these various things, it's infinitely easier to wrap it in a class so you have one place where you contain all this stuff instead of having 50 different helper functions and you need to pass around these variables that you need to call them with and remember. I have everything contained in one. To instantiate the class, everything you need for the user is in that class. Make sense? Okay. Let's try to do the exercise. We have 35 minutes until the break, so I think we'll just go until the break and then we'll continue afterwards. Oh, I have too much stuff open here. Here. Okay. So the exercises, let us try to do the first 3. Create a user class, create an instance of the class, create a class method. And then we'll do the other one at some point after the break. We'll talk more. Yes? Have a question? No. I will leave this here. I'll go get coffee. Oh, right, yeah. It's again a best practice thing. Like you would, when you see these below in class now, when you will see them again, you will be in the hack. You always uppercase. It's just a general how people do it.
Okay.
So you can do it lowercase if you want, it will work the same, but uppercase is just, it's nice to be able to see the difference between a class, which is not instantiated, and then saving a variable in lowercase. So it's easy to see that uppercase things is something you instantiate, lowercase things is something that's the view only exists outside of the structure. So if you want to say you don't have to do codes. Yes, this is only used outside the class. It doesn't happen.